Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And on behalf of the British Council and Cambridge University Press, we're very pleased to see all of you here today for this great event. This event is part of the UK-Russia Year of Language and Literature 2016, a year in which we are celebrating the great language and literature heritages of both countries, in Russia and in the UK. Today is a double celebration. We're here today to celebrate 30 years of Raymond Murphy's famous book, English Grammar in Use, a book which I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, will have one copy, if not two. And I'm sure many of you today will have brought books for signing later on. Well, today we'll be hearing from Raymond Murphy himself with a short talk, followed by another talk from Cambridge University Press's Duncan Christelow. And to wind up the day, we will have a session of questions for Raymond Murphy and a book signing afterwards. A great welcome to you all. I hope you enjoy the afternoon. Thank you.
I was here 4 years ago in Moscow the last time. It's lovely to be back. It's a lovely experience for me to travel. Well, to travel is a lovely experience, but it's a particularly lovely experience to travel to countries where I get to meet people who have been very kind to me about how they've used my books, and it's very flattering, but anyway, I appreciate it very much. And I also get the chance sometimes to meet learners using them as well. So it's my contact these days, since I don't teach anymore, it's my contact with the world of learning English. Today, I thought what I'd like to do is to introduce myself a little bit more, tell you a little bit about my background in teaching, and then I will say what I'm going to talk about. So I'd like to just tell you a little bit about my teaching background. My teaching background, and I'm not a teacher anymore, first of all, it's going to be probably rather different from yours. My teaching experience is going to be rather different from yours. First of all, my teaching experience was a long time ago. Your teaching experience is probably continuing right up to the present. I stopped teaching in 1990, which is 25 years ago. And when I was teaching, I taught in the UK and in Germany. I taught in private language schools. I taught in private language schools, which meant I taught small groups of usually quite motivated learners. And in the UK, people coming from countries all over the world, mixed nationalities. And also, therefore, using English as the medium of instruction. Some of those things may be the same for you, but some of them will be different. Another important thing is that I didn't teach children. I've never taught children, hardly ever taught children anyway. So my experience was with adults, by which I mean people of about 17 maybe, plus 17 and upwards. So that is my teaching experience. Because it's different from yours, probably, and because it's a long time ago, you can see that I'm not qualified to talk about teaching. And there's no way that I'm going to say things like what you should do in your classroom with your students, because I'm not in a position to do that. I've never been in your situation. I haven't taught children, and I haven't taught in Russia. In fact, I don't think I've ever taught a Russian student. We had students coming from all over the world, but I stopped teaching in 1990. After 1990, there were many Russian students going to the sort of school that I taught at. But before 1990, there were hardly any, if any. So I'm not going to talk about teaching. What I would like to talk about is what I feel I know about, what I've experienced, which is ways of presenting material, in my case grammar material. I'd like to talk about a few issues involved in presenting grammar material, and this is from my experience originally as a teacher, as a language learner, and as a writer of grammar books. I want to say that what I'm going to talk about, you might not agree with, but it's my opinion. It's based on my experience. You may have different opinions based on your experience, and of course I respect that. But anyway, I'm going to tell you what I think and what informs my thinking when writing. When I wrote the two books that I've written, and there are only two, English Grammar in Use, that's the blue one, intermediate, and Essential Grammar in Use, the red one, I was writing for the students that I taught in the language school in England, in Oxford, where I live. I was writing for those students, and they came from all over the world, sometimes for a short period, sometimes for a much longer period. I was writing for particular students, the real people I was teaching. I wasn't writing for an abstract audience. I wasn't writing for other teachers or other grammarians. I was writing for the actual people I taught. I had them in my head as I was teaching them at the time. And I was thinking, how does that person understand this? Is this okay to say this for that person? Will that person understand it? That's how I was writing the book back in the 1980s. Right? I don't have that situation anymore, but that's how it was written. Now, I was writing in English for people who were learning English, which is not the same, of course, as writing in Russian for people who are learning English. I was writing in the language that they were learning. So they had to work through this text in English, okay? But they were only learning English. They hadn't learned English, so the language had to be adapted, had to be controlled, had to be suitable for these learners. Now, that was the main motivation I had in writing those books. So recently, when I was preparing this talk, I looked back at the book systematically to see how much terminology there was in my book. Because originally, my thought was that I was writing for learners, therefore I must make things as clear and simple as possible without too much complicated language, and especially without too much grammatical terminology. Some, but not too much. That was my aim. But when I looked at what I'd written, well, there is quite a lot of terminology, actually, quite a lot of grammatical terminology. Now, in that slide, those examples, they are points, they are terms that I use frequently in English Grammar in Use without explaining them. So I sort of expect the student to know what these things are. Present, past, and future. Noun, verb, adjective, adverb, preposition. Singular and plural. The word sentence, structure, word order, and expression. Those are examples of terms that I use in the book without explaining. They may be explained in some situations, but generally I think the students I was writing for were comfortable with those expressions, those words. And this terminology, which is a bit more, technical, present simple, past continuous, etc., other tenses, comparative, superlative, clause, relative clause, subject, object, direct speech, reported speech, active, passive, countable, uncountable. I do not and did not expect students to know. They might know, but they might not. So if I used those terms, if I felt I needed to use those terms, I would always explain them. So I wouldn't just say present simple, I would say present simple, brackets, I work, I play, I want, etc. Something like that. Something to help the learner know what you're talking about. Okay? Remember, we're not talking only about Russian learners here, we're talking about people from all over the world. So, I'd like to look at terminology a little bit more and look at some terminology that, for me, doesn't work. Here's an example. Present participle. Example sentence, they were waiting for me when I arrived. And there, in red, is the present participle, waiting. And this is called the present participle. Participle doesn't really mean anything. It's just a word people throw in grammar books. Present participle, they were waiting for me when I arrived, is clearly not present, but we call this the present participle. That is surely confusing. That is bad naming, a bad label. Can we avoid that label? Well, I think we can. We can just call it ing or ing. So we use ing in this situation. Am is our ing, verb to be, present continuous, rather than am is our plus present participle. The past participle, the brother of the present participle, has a similar problem. How is this word used? Used is the past participle. Is the sentence past? Clearly not. How is this word used? It's present, present simple, general. It's not past. So past participle is also a bad name. However, is there a better one? And I think it's very, very difficult to find a better name because in the first case, present participle, everything ends in ing, so we can call it ing. But past participles, well, they can end in ed, okay, like played, or they can end in n, like known, or en, like written, or made, de. They can end in different ways. So there's no easy way to label it in the same way as you can label present participle. So, in my book, I do actually use the term past participle. For example, when presenting the present perfect, I might have a table, have and has, with gone, written, seen, etc. And I would, at the top of that, put past participle and say that some past participles are irregular, see Appendix 2 or something. So I do use the term past participle because I don't see an alternative to it. And I do need to call it something in the book I've written. So that terminology is unhappy, but present participle is also unnecessary. Past participle, well, if you think of a good name, I'll be glad to know. This is unnecessary terminology. It's getting more serious. The definite article. What is the definite article? Somebody asks you. And the answer would be the is the definite article. Is anything else the definite article? No. Well, of course, it can be pronounced the as well as the, but basically it's the same word. So what is the definite article? The definite article is the. Why do we have to say anything more about it? Please remember, I'm talking about learners, and learners from all over the world. All right? If you're talking to your colleagues, if you're talking to linguists, if you're talking to grammarians, if you're talking to other language enthusiasts, if you're talking about the language that you've already learnt to somebody else who has already learnt it, and you're talking about the definite article in different languages, fine. Of course that's useful. If you're talking about different languages, you can't say the. You have to say the definite article. So I'm not talking about people in that situation. I'm talking about people who are learning, right? So I don't see any reason to use the term the definite article. I would just call it the, okay? For example, we do not use the with the names of countries, for example, right? Rather than we don't use the definite article. Here's another one, which is not my friend, the conditional, the word conditional, or conditionals, conditional sentences. And that seems to have a totally undeserved place in the hierarchy of English grammar. When we say conditional, when we're talking about English and learning English, we're referring to clauses or sentences with if. So why can't we talk about if? Or maybe if sentences, or if clauses maybe, or just if, ... Really, that's what you need to refer to it. If is the word conditional is a particular problem, because I don't know when, but at some point in the history of the language, somebody invented the following terms: first conditional, second conditional, third conditional, and then there was a pause, wasn't there? And then somebody discovered, you just said it, zero conditional. 1, 2, 3, 0. Yeah. So 4 conditionals so far. What about the 5th and the 6th? I've got 7 in my head, if possible. All right? Why is this so complex and so contrived and so artificial when we're talking about language? Why do we have to break it down in this way? I think maybe the first pedagogical person who devised first, second, third conditional had good intentions, and it helped people see how English sentences with if were constructed. And I don't want to criticize that. Or maybe I do, because it's really, really rather unnecessary. Now, let's look at some examples with if. If it rains, you're talking about your house, which is not in very good condition, all right? And you say to somebody, awful this house, don't know why I live here. If it rains, water comes in through the roof. It's terrible. Water comes in through the roof. What's that? First, second, third, 0, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, what? Is that 0? That's a 0 conditional. It's a funny way of looking at life, that's all I can say. That's called the 0 conditional. The second one, if it rains, water will come in through the roof. Do you have a name for that? Traditionally, that's called first conditional. Very similar meaning to the 0, isn't it? In this case. I put in brackets, not will rain, because that is a common error for people whose languages people who use a future form in the if clause in their languages. So that is a particular problem with if, but it's got nothing to do with first, second, and third conditionals or the word conditional. That's just something you've got to teach separately. And it's not just if, it's all sorts of conjunctions like when, until, and in other cases, insubordinate clauses where we don't use will. That's a different question. The second one. Somebody says to me, I'm tired, I'm really tired, I'm awfully tired. And I say, well, if you're tired, why don't you go to bed? If you're tired, why don't you go to bed? What one's that? First, second, third, 0, minus 1, 2, 3. So we've got a present tense in both clauses, a present simple form in both clauses, as in the 0 one at the top. But we don't feel it's quite the same. I don't know. The second one is the past of that, really. So somebody says, oh, I was really tired last night. I was so tired, and now I'm even more tired. When I was really tired last night, but I stayed up till very late. So if you were tired, why didn't you go to bed? If you were tired last night, why didn't you go to bed? Is that second conditional? Like, you know, if you were me, what would you do? If the weather were better, I would go for a walk. So the past tense here is not the same as the past tense in if I were you. In fact, this is a normal past tense. And the third one, if she didn't call you yesterday, I think she'll call you later today. This situation is, my friend says to me, Anna was supposed to call me yesterday and she didn't, and I'm really worried, and I'm terribly worried, really worried about this. And you say, don't worry. If she didn't call you yesterday, I think she'll call you later today. If she didn't call you yesterday. It's not quite the same as if I didn't have to work, I wouldn't work. So all these conditionals here on the screen, I wouldn't call first or second or third conditionals. In fact, I wouldn't call them conditionals, of course. They are just normal sentences. That's what they are. They're absolutely normal English sentences. And the tenses here are no different from the tenses in any other situation. It says, if you change this to the word, instead of if, think of because. Yeah, water comes into the roof, the room is damp because water comes into the roof, right? Present. It's the same. It's the same construction as if it rains, water comes in through the roof. So there's nothing special about if here. All you have to know, if your language is similar enough, all you have to know is the word for if in English. I mean, the word if in English, if it corresponds to the word if in your language. Everything else is normal. So this is, if you like, normal if. Nothing to worry about. No second or third conditionals. But if you look at it on the surface, it looks like a second or third conditional. The meaning in all these sentences, the underlying meaning is like, if it is a fact that you are tired, why don't you go to bed? If it is a fact that you are tired, that's the underlying meaning. But that's perfectly normal structure. So with if, why not just focus on the difficult bits? This is the normal bit. And then you say, but we also use past tenses for unreal situations or unlikely situations, like if I were you, if the weather were better, if I didn't have to work today, if I hadn't seen you, and so on, where we're using past tenses in order to convey the idea of unreality or improbability. So that's the separation you have to make. Normal will and unusual will. Okay? Normal will and problem will. But first, second, third, and mixed conditionals. Yeah, mixed. I mean, if they mix, then why bother to have first, second, and third? It's not they're mixing. They're just different tenses because they're past or present. Conditional, anyway. I don't like it. And the third one I've got on this list is third person singular. It could be second person plural or first person singular. Why would you want to refer to the form of a verb in that way? If someone was doing an exercise and they had to put the verb in the right form, and the sentence was, she want that's the verb, to go home, and you have to put want in the right form. And your student writes or says, she want, and you want to hear wants. And the student says want, and you want to correct the student or help the student to correct himself or herself. Do you say, now, which person is that? Is it first, second, or third person? Is it singular or plural? That's a lot of unreal and unnecessary stuff to add. We don't need that. Let the language speak for itself. He, she, or it. All you need to say to the person is, she. She. Emphasize the she. That's the important idea. She wants. Not third person singular wants. It doesn't help. Particularly as the third person singular includes it, which is not a person. So that's what I call unnecessary. In my opinion, it's all in my opinion, and it's all for learning, for learners, not for language experts. So my message here is or my belief is that we should let the language speak for itself as much as possible. And okay, it's not always possible, past participle, for example, but I do it, or try to do it, as much as I can. Now, here's some more terminology to think about. I've called it problematic. The first one, infinitive. When we say the word infinitive, what do we mean? Do we mean work or to work? Go or to go? Eat or to eat? So if we say, you've got to use the infinitive here, what do we mean? Do we mean go or to go? In the examples, they should work harder. They ought to work harder. Okay, so are they different, those two things? Work and to work, would you say? Would you say they were different things? I would say not. What is the difference between work and to work? Well, it's simple mathematics. To work minus work equals 2. So 2 is the difference. That is the difference between it. So whatever we call it, okay, if we call it infinitive, then one is the infinitive and the other one is to infinitive. But there are various labels used for these terms by various writers. Work is sometimes called the infinitive. I would call it the infinitive because although infinitive is a technical term, borrowed from Latin, it is familiar to a lot of learners whose language also uses a word like infinitive. That's European languages, obviously. So it is familiar to quite a lot of people. If it wasn't, I wouldn't use it. But it's that familiarity, even though it's a technical term. The second term, base form, is actually a very accurate label for work. It is exactly what it is. It's the base form. It's the one on which everything else is based. So base form is a better term in that sense. But I think it's quite unfamiliar for a lot of learners. It will depend on their educational background and so on. But I don't use base form just because I don't feel comfortable with it. It's a term I feel will be a little bit unfamiliar to more people than infinitive. Infinitive without to always seems a bit negative, but calling it the infinitive without to implies that to work is the infinitive. Now, some people say that to work is the infinitive, or to plus infinitive, that's what I would say, or the infinitive with to, which is the same thing. Now, this was an issue for me when I wrote English grammar, the American language version of English Grammar in Use, which I wrote with an American adapter and editor. They change various things, of course, sometimes grammar, but mainly vocabulary and things like that. But one point that was changed was this. In American English teaching circles, I was told by my co-writer and my adapter that the infinitive is I'll start again. That the base form is work, that work is the base form, and that to work is the infinitive. Okay, so they said, I said, after can, we use the infinitive, brackets, can do, can play, can see. And they said, no, it's not the infinitive, that's the base form. The infinitive is to play, to do, okay? And I'm told by Americans, some Americans anyway, teachers and so on, this is the norm for teachers of American teachers of English. But it makes no sense, because as we said at the beginning, it's the same thing. The only difference is to. So whichever form you use, it's got to be the same. So either infinitive and to plus infinitive, or you could say base form and to plus base form. But to use a base form for one and infinitive for the other implies, it suggests, that they are two different things, whereas they're not. The second one there is gerund. I've not got much to say about gerund. It's a Latin term, of course, and early English grammar was written by classically minded people. A lot of it was based on Latin grammar, and gerund corresponds to a Latin form. So I enjoy dancing, that's a gerund. Dancing is fun, that's a gerund. Why call this a gerund? Verbal noun is another word, but why call it verbal noun? Why not just, like the present participle, ing? It's always ing. I enjoy dancing. We use, after enjoy, we use ing. I don't think you need to say gerund or to identify it. Yeah, so is this a gerund? Is that a gerund? Yeah. It's not a good question. These are some ways that I would try and avoid using terminology without explaining it in some way. Using things as clearly as possible without much terminology. After these verbs, we use to. This would be a line in a grammar book. After these verbs, we use to, ... meaning infinitive with to. Yeah. So to do, to go, to see. If this was in a unit about using gerund and infinitive, then it would be clear what to ... means. Another example, after some verbs you can use ing or to, rather than after... Why has it gone yellow? That's funny. Wasn't in the script. After some verbs you can use ing or to, rather than after some verbs you can use a gerund or a verbal noun or the infinitive. The third one I've already used myself when I was speaking to you. We use can plus infinitive. And then to show what I mean by infinitive, do, play, write, etc. Okay? Not to play, not to write, but write, play, showing what I mean by infinitive, because it could mean to also. And some more. Be plus past participle, but don't stop there. Brackets, used, done, broken. Explains, helps to explain what I'm talking about. To identify, not explain. Compare the present perfect. What's that? Oh yeah, have seen. Yeah. And the past perfect, had seen, etc. The last one there, after in spite of or despite, this is a unit about using in spite of, despite, and although, right? And somewhere in that unit, the text is something like this. After in spite of or despite, we use a noun, a pronoun, or ing. Right. A noun, I think that's okay. The other examples in the page made it clear. You don't need to say anything more. A pronoun? Well, think of a pronoun. I, me, you. You may not think of these words as pronouns. So, using in spite of and despite, these are the sort of pronouns that you might use. In spite of this, in spite of that, in spite of what I said. So in that case, I would give examples of it. And now we come to the more really serious stuff, really unnecessary terminology. There's two examples here. Shall we go by train? I don't watch TV very much. I've just invented those as examples of what someone has decided to call zero article. Now, don't think this is the same zero as zero conditional, because it means something completely different. Zero article. The text in front of you is from a web page, from a website which is for learners of English. And it's actually a website for people looking for schools to study English in England. But it's got a little section on grammar. I don't know why. I just happened to find this by Googling it, and I was looking for examples. And this is an example of something written for a learner of English, I don't know, intermediate level maybe. And it's called the zero article. I'll just read it out. We've seen how nouns usually have an article. The indefinite articles, or un, or the definite article, the. Sometimes, though, there is no article associated with a noun, and this can be called the zero article. Here are some simple rules for when not to use an article. Now, as Russian and English teachers, or maybe learners of English, is somebody telling you, giving you some rules of when not to use an article. So all that work you've put into when to use an article, now you've got when not to use it. So it's a change from the usual prescription. The point about this is written for learners. I don't know what your learners are like, but my learners at intermediate level could read that, but it would be hard. So the language level is quite high, associated with things like that. Also, though, more importantly, it's irrelevant. It's unhelpful. It's an essay on the zero article. Who is it written for? It's written for me, maybe, for you, but it's not written for somebody learning the language. This is an example of a writer not talking to their students. You remember at the beginning I talked about trying to keep my audience in my head. There's no audience here. The writer is talking to himself or herself. That's who they're talking to. Maybe they're friends, their peers, other teachers, but that's not somebody talking to a learner. But the thing about zero article is that it doesn't exist. Why have a label for something that doesn't exist? You can say, we don't use a in this situation. We don't use the in situation, these examples there. Okay? We don't say, shall we go by the train, or I came here by a train. You don't have to say, in this situation, we use the zero article. So what are you using? You're not using. So why say you're using? It's horrible. Zero article, zero conditional, of course, means something completely different, as we found out already. A zero conditional means something less than one, doesn't it? Is that what it means? Yeah, yeah. First conditional, second conditional, third conditional, and then you say, oh, we forgot the other one, so we'll make that zero because we can't move the others up, yeah? It's crazy. Zero conditional. Okay. Let the language speak for itself, and we can avoid some problems like that. Apart from terminology, I'd like to say something about the general style of writing and the complexity. I think it's very important to be as direct and as simple, avoiding complications. And I'd just like to look at a couple of examples of that before I finish. The first example is actually for me as a learner, because I've been sort of trying to learn Thai for the last too many years. And okay. So there's an example here of a sentence which was used in this is the Thai course, not exactly a course, but learning material that I've got that I use regularly. And this is like a grammar module, a grammar unit. And the sentence at the top is the key sentence. That's what we're studying. And the red bit was the significant bit in it. So I was looking at the sentence, we bought each of our kids a hat. Now, a quick diversion here from English, because I just want to say something about the language here. The writer of this course, which is very good, by the way, and I enjoy enormously, it's very helpful, has the structure of the sentence underneath it, okay? So this bit here, classifier, that's the structure of the sentence, the four parts that he's divided it into. So, uses this word classifier. In Thai, you have a part of speech called a classifier. A classifier is a bit like a pronoun. It's a word you use instead of a noun in certain situations. The easiest example to explain very quickly is with counting. So if you say in Thai, I bought 3 books, you say something like, I buy, not bought, because there's no tenses in Thai, okay? No past, no present, no future, never changes, just buy. So it's I buy book, not books, no plural in Thai, all right? Lots of other problems, but no plural. Words never change. So I buy book 3, and then a word, which is called a classifier, which is used instead of book. All right? If I say, I have 10 children, it would be, I have, more or less, yeah, I have child, okay, 10, and then the word used instead of child or children, all right? So I have child 10, And if it was, that would be a different word from the book word, okay? So different groups of words have a different classifier depending on what sort of thing they are, or whether they're big things, small things, flat things, round things, people or animals and things like that. There's all sorts of different classifications, all right? So I bought 5 mangoes would be a different one to children and hats and so on. So he starts off with classifier for an indirect object. After that, you use the word la, which means each. So that's each of. each of our kids, sorry. And then the number, which in this sentence is one, or all right, a hat, and the classifier for the direct object, which is a hat, okay? And at the bottom, that's the Thai sentence word for word. We buy hat for kid, classifier each. One, that's the number, yeah, one hat. One classifier for hat. So that's what we're learning, all right? And as you can imagine, classifiers and things, word order, that's quite important there. But here, this is my problem. This is why I put this up. Indirect object, direct object. Standard technical terms in grammar books. And may be useful in some situations, depending on the language, depending on the learner. But here, it doesn't help us a bit. This is a course written in English, all right? So all this is written in English, not in Thai. So they're using English as the medium of instruction. And it's written for English speakers or people, English speakers, people who are native speakers or who have learnt English, people who know English enough to follow this. So we already know, as learners, we already know what a direct object and an indirect object is, really. We don't call them that because we don't talk about them in real life. We know that we bought the hat, not the kid. That's clear. And that's the direct object idea. Calling it a direct object is for people to philosophize about afterwards. But you don't need that sort of label because the meaning is clear. But you don't know it's a direct object, but you know that it's the thing that was bought in this sentence. Similarly, indirect object. We know the kids weren't bought. We know the hat was given to the kids. That's our inbuilt language knowledge. We understand the concept there. So if there are occasions where direct object and indirect object is useful, here it's just irrelevant. It's more words to look at. It complicates it. The guy who wrote this knows a little bit about grammar, and so he has to put this in. It's unnecessary. It's a pity, because as I said earlier, it's very good material. So to get back to English, not that one. This is an example of something I think is a bit complex. It's called possessive adjectives, which are known also apparently as determiners, sort of old-fashioned label and a new-fashioned label, if you need labels at all. Possessive adjectives are not pronouns, but rather determiners. It is useful to learn them at the same time as pronouns, however, because they are similar in form to the possessive pronouns. Possessive adjectives function as adjectives, so they appear before the noun they modify. They do not replace a noun as pronouns do. It's everything you need to know about possessive adjectives there. Now, possessive adjectives, my, your, his, her, their, etc. Level of learning that? Advanced? Probably okay with possessive adjectives. Intermediate? The same. It's an elementary level topic. Beginner's level even. So, who is this for? Is this from the same website as the other one I showed you? It may have been written by the same person, for all I know. The Zero article one. So, who are they writing for? This is particularly difficult to read. Again, it's a grammar writer talking to him or herself. Those are more specific cases that I noticed and a couple of things I looked at on various websites. There's nothing wrong with saying use will for predictions, but will the learner know what a prediction is? And if the learner doesn't, then there's not a lot of point in saying it. Now, I do use the word predict in a unit on will, but I do explain in the example what it means. But here, it's just we use will to make predictions and examples. They do give examples. They do give examples of predictions, but I don't think you should just use a word rather carelessly like that. And in the second one, we use be going to if something is likely to happen. Likely, I think it's unlikely that students will be, I wouldn't assume that students would know that word, know that meaning. And it's potentially confusing because it's from like. It's not a very good explanation either, but that's another matter. I'm not thinking about that now. Here are some examples of where something has been presented and where I think I would present it differently. The verbs in the list below are usually followed by the infinitive, want, plan, decide, etc., plus examples. I would just do that. Verbs plus to, want to do, etc., making it clear what I mean. And then, as before, the list of verbs and examples. Just cutting out in the list below, usually followed by. You might feel it's good for your learners to have all that extra language in their grammar book. That's an argument. You could say that. If they study a lot of grammar, they learn the language of explaining grammar, which is as good as the language of doing anything, but I don't think that's a strong argument for it, and I don't think it's why people do it. I think it's just laziness. As a main verb, to have implies the meaning of possession. It's not easy to explain what have means. Yeah, it's like be. I mean, these words that we use all the time, the most common words are the most difficult to paraphrase, to explain. Of course, you can translate it. If you're teaching people who all speak the same language, you can simply translate it, so there's no problem. Here, they're writing for an international audience, implies, and then it's the meaning of possession. Or why not just say it means possess if you want to use that, not that possess is a particularly clear word. That's an alternative. If you're talking about have, in the sense of have got, I have or I have got something, meaning it is mine. Certainly that covers the idea of possession in a way that a low-level learner would probably understand. And that one? Before different time expressions, English uses different prepositions plus examples. I would just go straight in, let the language speak for itself. At, maybe a table with examples, sentence examples, same for on, the same for in. I don't think you need always to introduce it in that sort of way and label things. So that's my feeling. Yeah, where possible, and it isn't always possible, excuse me, let the language speak for itself. I'd like to finish by just adding a couple of thoughts then about grammar. First of all, I think it's important that we look on grammar as a positive thing rather than a negative thing, a facilitating thing. It facilitates, it enables you to do something. It enables you. It doesn't just stop you. It doesn't stop you from doing things, which seems to be the way we treat it. You can't do this, you mustn't do this. But it enables you to put words together in order to communicate, to say something to somebody else. We look upon it, I think, far too negatively, and students do as well, see problems in it all the time, where it's the key, it's one of the keys to success, along with everything else, putting things together. The second thing I want to say, so two things really. You can learn a language without studying the grammar. Of course, you do this with your first language, but also with a second language. Lots of people learn without any studying to quite a good high level. Maybe not written language, but spoken language. A good, natural, high, fluent level without knowing anything about grammar, without being able to talk about it, without being able to label anything, but their brain has learnt the grammar, has acquired that grammar. So you can speak a language, learn a language without studying grammar. But the second part, if you study all the grammar and you learn it and you know every rule and you do every exercise in the book and you can explain to other people how this tense is used and when to use that preposition, but you can't actually speak or understand very well. So knowing all the grammar doesn't by any means mean that you can speak the language, that you've learned the language. But the other way round does work. You can learn the language without the grammar. So it's just about putting grammar in its place and being positive about it, and then being sensitive to the people we're teaching, that I'm writing for, that you're teaching. And if you are using English terminology, and Russian terminology, because I think the same applies even if you're using Russian terminology, I think just to be, a little bit careful about what you say, to question it and to reduce it as much as possible. And again, I'm only talking about the situation with learners. I'm not talking about terminology generally. I'm not undermining anybody's investment of their time and education in learning about language, but that's a different area of activity. That's all I'd like to say, and I'd like to thank you very much for listening.
So what we're going to do is we have received from you, thank you for giving us some questions, a series of questions, and I'm entirely in the hands of my colleague here, and one at a time, no? I don't need to do all of these, do I? Oh, goodness me. Well, Ray Murphy, welcome to Moscow. I have some questions for you. I hope you'll be willing to answer. Is it okay if I stay here, or would you like for the purposes? Yes. So, the first question is, how old were you when you taught your very first English lesson, and how did it go? That's from Oksana.
Is she here?
Ah.
Hi.
There may be more than one Oksana, but you'll know if you wrote that.
First English lesson, 1971. 24, 25, something like that, when I started. That was in Hamburg in Germany. That was my first teaching job. How did it go? Not disastrously, but I had no training. In those days, this is 1971. If you were a native speaker, especially a British native speaker, and you had a degree in anything, you stood a good chance of getting a job teaching English in any country without any experience in many cases and without any relevant qualifications. That's how I got my first job, without any relevant qualifications and without any experience, because at that time you could get a job without an interview, actually. So I got this job on the basis of having a degree in history and politics. It's good, preparation. No induction course whatsoever, no preparation, just my colleagues, learning from my colleagues, asking my colleagues. They thought at that time, 1971, the owner of the school had a course which he thought anyone could teach, all right, because it was all specified exactly. So they reckoned that any idiot could teach it and didn't need special training. So that was the first lesson. I can't remember how it went I can remember there were only 4 people in the class. I can remember them well. So that stayed with me. And I know I got better in the course of teaching there for a year at that school. Much better, actually. And learnt a lot from teaching particular course books that had teachers' books. And I learnt a lot from teachers' books how to teach. Not necessarily the right way or the best way to teach, but it was a way to teach. And all I wanted was a way to teach at that time. What was the second part of the question?
How did it go? So I think you said that. So, what you're saying is that there were 4 people in there at the beginning of the lesson and 4 people at the end, so it went well.
Something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, well, I may as well push on because we've got an awful lot of questions here, actually, and I'm sure some of them are very interesting. That one was very interesting. I'm sure they're all very interesting. So, what job did you dream of when you were a child? That's quite a hard question. Or maybe it isn't.
No, it's not, because it was asked me about 2 days ago.
Okay.
And even I can remember. And I remember this as well. This is true. So when I was a child, at the age of around, it must have been 9, 10, 8, 9, 10, 11, something like that. This was the mid-50s, okay? And there was no television, at least not in the house I was brought up in. There was no television, and but there was radio, and you'd listen to the radio. And I wanted to be a radio announcer or newsreader. Not a television one, because it didn't have television. It was a radio, the voices on the radio. And I think that may have something to do with the fact that I don't have my regional accent, as I come from the southwest of England. And most of the people I went to school with, who've had the same education as me and gone to university and things, they speak, it's similar to me, but a bit more of an accent. And I think I lost mine. And I don't know this is true, but it may be true. And if that is the case, maybe it's because I wanted to be a radio announcer, because radio announcers speak in a very clear voice. And at that time, they spoke in a very upper class voice, like that. Very, very, very precise voice. They don't do that anymore. But that could be the reason why I lost an accent. But that was the first job that I wanted to do.
Perhaps it's something that you could still fulfill, that dream, because, people of our age, we can be behind the microphone and not in front of the camera, and people can listen to our voices. We don't need to be young and attractive.
Thank you, Duncan.
Yes. I think I'll move swiftly on to the next question. Dear Mr. Murphy, is there a hierarchy of mistakes in the English grammar? If there is, from the top of your rich experience, which one would you consider the queen of mistakes? That's a very beautiful question.
Don't know.
It's okay to not know.
No, nothing comes to mind. I don't think about mistakes. I mean, less and less. When I was teaching, maybe more. And I think if I was starting teaching again, 25 years after the last time I did, I'd try to advise myself about certain things. And one of them would be definitely not to focus on errors maybe as much as I did at the time. And I hope, anyway, that although the book does point out errors, because I think common errors, because it's useful for learners to know that, it helps to highlight the point. I hope it doesn't concentrate on errors, because the intention is to be positive about it. What I said about grammar earlier, trying to be positive that grammar enables you, rather than, it's not about mistakes all the time. So don't really have a clear answer to that question, except I don't think about mistakes very much anymore, and I don't think you should worry too much about mistakes anymore, and I don't think when you're interacting with native speakers you should worry about making mistakes either.
No, we like mistakes.
Pardon?
We like mistakes, don't we?
We
because
do.
We like people to be expressing themselves.
We're very tolerant.
Yes, we are. Indeed.
Because our language is international, And we're used to the language being spoken, not wrongly, incorrectly, but in different ways. There are many, many different ways of speaking English. So
I can guarantee that a mistake-filled question from a Russian speaker will be more effectively understood than my attempt at a Russian question in the reverse direction. So shall we move on to the next question? Ray, who helps you to make good examples for your books?
Who helped me?
Who helps you? Or maybe nobody helps you.
Nobody, no.
No, so it's all...
They're all, I'm not sure, maybe this is what the question means. They're all invented examples. Some of them may be things I'd actually heard, but they're not taken from a corpus or anything like that. You know, they're not collected by computer anywhere and I've reused them. They're all just me trying to write what I think is fairly natural, neutral English, all right? So it's not the language of any particular group or any particular age group. It's fairly neutral, acceptable to anybody, more or less. So I would say they're pseudo-authentic, not authentic, but pseudo-authentic. But no, there's no source, as far as I know, of these examples, other than myself. Yeah.
The next one's a straightforward question for you, I think, Rain. In fact, you may already have answered it. Mr. Murphy, are you Irish? If you are, happy St. Patrick's Day for yesterday.
For yesterday. Thank you. Who is that from?
From Natalia.
Thank you, Natalia. Thank you. This is a copy of my passport. It says Ireland. But I also have a British one.
Sometimes handy to have two.
Well, exactly. My parents were Irish and migrated to England. I was born in England, and I actually went back to Ireland to study. I went to university in Dublin for 3 years, so I had that connection with Ireland. My family is mainly in Ireland and the United States, not in England, apart from me and my sister actually went to Ireland to live as well. So we still have a lot of connections with Ireland. But I'm not really Irish, and if you asked an Irish person listening to my voice, they'd laugh if I said I was Irish. So I'm technically Irish, dual nationality, but really I'm British and English. That's my background, that's what I grew up in, and that's my accent as well. But thank you for the question. Did you have a happy St. Patrick's Day? Did you have a few? No? I arrived back from Samara. I was in Samara yesterday and arrived back very late, and I had a few drinks, alone, by myself, for St. Patrick's Day. Yeah.
Right, if you'd arrived a couple of hours earlier, you could have shared the Guinness that Natasha and I had, not in the hotel, but...
Yeah.
Well, yes, but it just so happened that they were serving Guinness where I was, 3 for the price of 2 or something like that.
Is that right?
4 for the price of 3, in fact, I think it might have been.
What did I have? I had, what was that called? The beer?
Siberian Crown, yes.
Siberian, what do you call it in Russian? Sibir. Okay, that's what I had, Sibir. Happy St. Patrick's Day for Sibir.
Well, maybe we'll get you a pint of Guinness or Murphy's tonight.
Okay.
Right, I've got a question here which says, what is the purpose of the picture content? That's a direct question.
The purpose of the picture content
Yes.
in my books is, on left-hand pages, it is illustrative, so it helps the learner to understand what the situation is, you know, especially if you've got conversation with speech bubbles to show direct speech. So it's illustrative, to illustrate the situation that's being described. In the red book, there are many more illustrations than in the blue book, and because people need more help in that respect. But in the red book also, a lot of exercises have illustrations, but their function is not just illustrative, but they're very functional. So the picture has to show something very exact, so that the learner can interpret the picture and complete the exercise. Illustrative and functional in exercises. That would be the answer.
I'd like to ask you a question of my own, if I may, which is, whilst working on the Russian edition, did you learn anything about the kinds of mistakes that Russian learners of English make? In other words, are they particularly different to those of other native languages?
I don't think so. I don't think they're particularly different. I'm not an expert on this. My role in the Russian edition of Essential Grammar and Use is that, well, what happens is that the adapter, who is of course Russian, adapts the text and translates the text, mainly translation, but adapts where necessary. So some things are changed because this is for Russian learners. So anything which can help a Russian learner a little bit more, she might add, and she might take away something which doesn't help the Russian learner at all, or change something in order to help the Russian learner. I don't see it then until she's done that, and then I comment on what she's done, and then we change a few more things until we find, we agree that we've got a final version. As regards the mistakes, well, I found in the course of the adaptation that most of the we call them error warnings, like in the example I had with will, if it rains, not if it will rain, yeah? Error warning, technical term. So these error warnings are much the same in the Russian edition as in most other editions. Of course, there are some things which are specially Russian, but there'd be quite small things, I think, concerned with certain words and the way certain words are used with certain grammar. So quite few, only a few things really. And most areas of difficulty like articles and tenses are shared with learners worldwide. Not all learners, obviously, but okay.
Time for one more? Time for one more. Ray, what is the best way of using the book while teaching grammar? Does that mean in the classroom?
Right. Two-part answer to this. If you write a book, or if you make anything and sell it, or paint a picture, hang it on the wall, or sell it. No, if you sell a picture. If you sell a picture, it's no longer yours. So whatever you've done, it doesn't belong to you anymore. Well, even if you don't sell it, actually, if you think of a picture, you paint a picture or something, you hang it on the wall of a gallery and you go in and see it, then what happens between you and the picture has got nothing to do with the artist. It's your personal reaction. And that can be anything. The artist doesn't control that. It's up to you. And the picture can't do anything, just hangs there. You're in charge. The buyer or in this case, the looker in the gallery, the spectator. With a book, you write a book, and it might be your intention that this book means something, or that it should be used in a certain way. All right? And that's the author's idea. Fine, it's the author's idea. Somebody buys the book, it's theirs. It's no longer the author's. It belongs to the owner of the book, and you can do whatever you want with that book. You can use it or read it in any way that you want to. That's the first thing I want to say. Second thing is to say I wrote it as a self-study book for students to use by themselves. The same goes for the app. Of course, it's clearly, in the case of the app, for students to use by themselves, in addition to anything that they do in class, or maybe as an alternative to what they might do in a class. That was my purpose in writing it. But how a teacher or a student uses it, that's up to them. That's my feeling about it anyway.
Got time for one little question? Ray, what's your favourite place in Great Britain, and why? Going to be asking him about his favourite food soon, aren't we? You can answer that question as well if you prefer.
At another meeting, it was, what is your favourite word?
What is your favourite word?
Well, that's what I asked the question after a while, because I was thinking, I don't really have a favourite word. So I said, what is your favourite word? And she said, Cucumber. Nice, eh? Cucumber. She's right.
I don't know which it is.
And I've thought about it since then, and I think, yeah, I'll take cucumber as a favourite word. It's pretty good. I don't have any other favourite words. I started to think about that, and then I forgot. But yeah, cucumber's good. Thank you to somebody. It was in Samara. Yeah. What's your favourite word, Duncan?
Procrastination.
Oh,
No, I lied.
yeah. I think we all know that. Yep.
I'm just waiting for one more question.
Okay.
It's not a question. Well, that's why I put it to one side. I thought that you'd mistakenly put something in that's not a question. So, on behalf of Susanna, I want to thank you for your excellent books, which we use every day.